are words that linger long after they are spoken, words that feel too heavy to belong to someone so young. I want to go somewhere where my father's shadow cannot touch me. Imagine the weight of that sentence coming from a 13-year-old girl. Not a rebellious adult, not a runaway, but the youngest daughter of a family once presented as unbreakable. This is not a child dreaming of beaches or theme parks. This is a child scanning the world map in search of refuge, of distance, of safety. What we are hearing now goes far beyond divorce papers or custody schedules. This is no longer about moving houses or changing states. According to growing speculation, this is about escape in its purest form. Insiders suggest that Kody Brown, the final minor child from the original wives, may be planning something far more radical than anyone expected. Not a move across town. Not even a relocation within the United States. The whispers suggest an international exit, a deliberate attempt to put an ocean between herself and the life that shaped her. Names like London and Paris keep surfacing, not as holiday destinations, but as places of reinvention. Cities where the surname Brown carries no weight, no history, no expectations. Yet standing firmly in her path is a legal and emotional obstacle that refuses to fade quietly into the background. Her father. What is unfolding is being described by some as a quiet standoff, a looming legal struggle over control rather than care. At the center of it is something deceptively simple yet incredibly powerful. Permission. A passport. A signature. The very tools that could either unlock Truly's freedom or keep her tethered to a past she is desperate to outgrow. If the rumors are accurate, this is not a disagreement about education. It is about autonomy. It is about whether a father who was emotionally absent for years still gets to dictate the future of the daughter he scarcely noticed. To understand why this situation feels so explosive, you have to understand what Truly represents. She is the closing chapter of an era. The last child of the original wives, still legally bound to the family structure that once defined everything. When she leaves, symbolically and physically, the cord is cut for good. There are no more shared obligations, no more reasons for forced unity. That alone gives this moment enormous weight. But what makes it even more striking is the reported fact that Truly has little interest in the traditional American path laid out before her. Why would she? Her experience of growing up in America was anything but ordinary. It came with cameras, public commentary, and an intimate front row seat to the slow collapse of her family. While other children were discovering themselves privately, Truly did so under a microscope. While others leaned on stable parental figures, she navigated a world where her father lived nearby yet remained emotionally distant, prioritizing other households, other relationships, other loyalties. The core truth of this story is painfully simple. This is not about academic ambition. It is about survival. Those close to the situation suggest that Truly wants to disappear into a place where her past cannot follow her. In Flagstaff, she is forever labeled the daughter from a fractured plural marriage, a background character in an adult drama she never consented to. In Europe, she becomes anonymous. In London or Paris, she is simply a young woman with a sketchbook, a reader, an observer. No cameras. No expectations. No inherited conflict. That anonymity is not rejection. It is healing. To grasp why she is willing to go to such lengths, we have to look at her personal evolution. Audiences watched Truly grow from a quiet, overlooked child into a distinctly expressive, creative teenager. That transformation did not happen in a vacuum. Moments once framed as television storylines were, in reality, defining experiences. The bicycle incident. The terrifying kidney failure. These were not episodes to be edited and archived. They were traumas that taught a young girl an early and brutal lesson. She could not rely on her father to protect her. The medical emergency in particular marked a turning point. It exposed a pattern of neglect that could no longer be explained away as busyness or misunderstanding. While attention and energy were funneled elsewhere, Truly was fading in plain sight. That experience carved a deep impression, one that still echoes in her choices today. Children do not forget who showed up when it mattered most. They also do not forget who didn't. Fast forward to the present and her identity speaks volumes. The dark clothing, the gothic influences, the alternative style are often dismissed as teenage rebellion. But that interpretation misses the point entirely. Her appearance functions as armor. It is a conscious rejection of the rigid, conservative aesthetic she was raised around. It is individuality made visible. Where conformity was once expected, self-expression now takes center stage. Her interests reinforce that narrative. Truly is drawn to art, literature, anime, and introspection. She creates rather than competes. She observes rather than dominates. These qualities hold little value in the world her father prioritized, a world built on hierarchy, authority, and performance. Europe, by contrast, symbolizes something else entirely. It represents centuries of art, philosophy, rebellion, and reinvention. This is not a random fantasy. It is a logical destination for someone who feels fundamentally out of place in the life she was handed. London offers language, literature, and history, worlds she already inhabits through books. Paris offers visual art, fashion, and the romance of anonymity. Sources suggest she has explored information about art institutions in the UK, imagining a future spent sketching in quiet cafes, wandering museums, and blending into streets where nobody knows her surname or her past. For truly, this is not running away. It is running towards something that finally fits. And then there is the factor that changes everything. A presence that reframes her understanding of what a father figure can be. David Woolley's influence, according to those watching closely, cannot be overstated. Where Truly once experienced emotional absence, she now experiences quiet encouragement. Where expectations once felt suffocating, support now feels unconditional. The contrast is stark and impossible to ignore. David is reportedly the voice telling her that her dreams are valid, that the world is larger than the family narrative she was born into. He does not demand obedience or loyalty. He offers safety. That alone is transformative. The theory circulating is that both emotionally and financially, David, alongside Christine, is helping make this vision of freedom possible. Not by forcing decisions, but by removing fear. At the heart of this entire situation lies one powerful idea: anonymity. The freedom to reinvent yourself without carrying the emotional debris of a past you never chose. For truly, anonymity is not a luxury, it is a necessity. But anonymity does not come cheaply. It requires more than courage and imagination. It requires documents, permissions, and ultimately, power. And this is precisely where the story takes a darker, more complicated turn. This is where Christine's role transforms from supportive parent into architect of freedom. Christine is often celebrated publicly as strong, resilient, and triumphant, but in this context, she becomes something far more primal. A mother who understands captivity because she survived it herself. She spent over 2 decades confined within a system designed to serve one man's ego. She knows exactly what it feels like to live inside a life that slowly erodes your identity. And because of that lived experience, she does not want her daughter to simply move out of a house. She wants her to escape the environment altogether. Christine's greatest weapon now is something she did not possess for most of her adult life: independence. Financial, emotional, and psychological. Between income earned through television, business ventures, and the stability of her current marriage, she no longer needs permission to act. She no longer needs to negotiate. For the first time, she can make decisions that prioritize her child's well-being without fear of retaliation or deprivation. And that reality alone represents a devastating blow to the man who once controlled everything. For years, financial leverage functioned as a tool of dominance. Support came with conditions. Resources were withheld to enforce obedience. But that weapon no longer exists. Christine can fund Truly's education, relocation, and future without requesting a single contribution. That loss of control is not merely inconvenient, it is psychologically destabilizing. When financial dominance disappears, only one tool remains: the law. This is where the looming conflict intensifies. What some are calling the passport standoff sits at the center of Truly's immediate future. It is not dramatic in appearance, but it is profound in consequence. Under United States regulations, a minor cannot be issued a passport without the consent of both biological parents in most circumstances. That signature becomes a gatekeeper between confinement and freedom. and according to growing speculation, that signature is being deliberately withheld. Publicly, this resistance would likely be framed as concern. The language would be familiar: she is too young, the world is dangerous, international travel is risky, relationships need repairing. It would be presented as the voice of a protective parent desperate to stay connected. But beneath that surface narrative lies a much colder truth. This is not about safety. It is about jurisdiction. As long as Truly remains within national borders, control remains possible. Courts can be accessed. Visitation can be enforced. Physical presence can be demanded. But the moment she steps onto foreign soil, that reach dissolves. Distance becomes absolute. Authority evaporates. For a man whose identity was built upon command and hierarchy, that loss is intolerable. This is what makes Truly's desire so threatening. It is not merely departure. It is disappearance from a system that once revolved around one central figure. For a patriarch accustomed to obedience, a child choosing distance, not rebellion, but absence, represents the ultimate rejection. And narcissistic injury rarely produces quiet acceptance. It produces resistance, manipulation, and guilt. The expected response follows a predictable pattern. Accusations of disloyalty, claims of parental alienation, assertions that a mother is poisoning a child's mind, emotional appeals disguised as moral arguments. This is not new. It is the same cycle that has played out repeatedly when children grow independent after years of neglect. Ignore them while they are present. Panic when they attempt to leave. But Truly is not entering this terrain unprepared. She has watched this dynamic unfold throughout her life. She has observed how distance has functioned as survival for her siblings. She has studied the outcomes. She knows the blueprint. She watched one sibling create physical separation and flourish. She watched another quietly withdraw, build boundaries, and prioritize peace. She has learned that within this family structure, proximity breeds chaos, while distance offers clarity. Yet her circumstances are uniquely intense. She is the last minor child. The final one exposed to the family's implosion in its most concentrated form. There was no buffer left. No shared responsibility. The emotional fallout landed squarely on her shoulders. That is why her plan reaches further than any before it. This is not about another state. It is about another continent. The trauma she absorbed demands a wider margin of safety. And that brings us back to the emotional core of this entire saga. A single sentence that encapsulates everything she is trying to escape. I want to go somewhere where his shadow cannot touch me. That shadow is not physical. It is symbolic. It represents cameras that documented her childhood before she could consent. It represents public commentary dissecting her family's failures. It represents being born into a televised experiment that collapsed in real time. It represents carrying a surname that immediately evokes controversy, judgment, and spectacle. Her life has never been private. Her most vulnerable moments were broadcast. Her identity has always existed within a context she did not choose. Even now, within familiar surroundings, she cannot simply be a young woman discovering herself. She is always a character, always observed, always framed by a narrative imposed upon her. Europe represents the one thing that environment cannot provide: erasure of context. In another country, her past dissolves. There are no expectations. No recognition. No inherited story. She is not a daughter from a failed system. She is not content. She is simply a person. This is why anonymity matters so deeply. It is not about rejecting family. It is about reclaiming selfhood. It is about finally existing without commentary, without labels, without inherited conflict. And that is something no authority figure can ethically deny. What happens next will determine far more than where Truly studies or lives. It will define whether control or compassion prevails. Whether autonomy is respected or resisted. Whether a young woman is allowed to step out of a shadow that was never hers to carry in the first place. Because this story is not about running away. It is about stepping into light that has been denied for far too long. The shadow that has followed Truly throughout her childhood stretches across America, but it does not cross the Atlantic. In the anonymity of a crowded London underground station or the quiet reverence of a Parisian art gallery, that shadow loses its power. It thins, it fades, and for the first time, she can breathe without feeling watched, judged, or defined by a history she never chose. This is not fantasy. It is the very real psychological pull of distance, and it explains why Europe has become more than a dream, it has become a lifeline. What is particularly telling is who truly is believed to have shared these thoughts with. Not her biological father, but David. That distinction matters. David listens without calculation. There is no production schedule, no concern about optics, no fear of public reaction. He sees a young woman carrying emotional weight far beyond her years and understands that her desire is not rebellion but relief. That difference, between being heard and being managed, is everything. The heartbreak at the center of this situation is impossible to ignore. We are not discussing an adult making a bold lifestyle choice. We are talking about a teenager who feels that the only way to be safe from the emotional debris left behind by her father is to put an ocean between them. That is not wanderlust. That is not youthful impulsivity. That is a search for sanctuary. She is not running towards glamour or adventure. She is running away from a presence that has come to symbolize pressure, disappointment, and unresolved pain. And her father knows it. That awareness is precisely why the resistance has become so fierce. Control, once challenged, rarely loosens its grip willingly. So the question becomes unavoidable. What happens if he wins this initial battle? What happens if the passport remains unsigned and truly is forced to stay where she is? This is where time enters the story as both threat and promise. The most dangerous mistake being made is the assumption that trueless patience equals compliance. It does not. It is strategy. The clock is ticking, and the moment she reaches adulthood, everything changes. The legal barriers collapse. Permission becomes irrelevant. Authority evaporates. On that day, the power to decide her future becomes hers alone. Those watching closely believe that if she is blocked now, she will simply wait. A gap year is already whispered about, a year of working, saving, planning, and preparing. Not as defeat, but as calculation. And here lies the tragedy her father fails to grasp. Every day she is forced to stay against her will is not drawing her closer. It is building distance brick by brick. By attempting to keep her physically near, he is ensuring emotional separation that may never be repaired. If she is stopped now, she will not stay out of renewed loyalty. She will stay out of necessity. And when she finally leaves, she will do so without hesitation or nostalgia. This is how estrangement is cemented, not in one dramatic moment, but in a series of small denials that communicate one brutal message. Your needs come second to my control. Of course, legal authority is not the only weapon available. If time runs out and legal leverage disappears, there is always the financial route. This pattern is not hypothetical. It has been used before. Support offered conditionally. Help extended only to those who comply. The unspoken threat is clear. Pursue your independence and you will do so alone. Make your dreams expensive enough, and perhaps they will collapse under their own weight. But this tactic underestimates the support system now surrounding Truly. Financial independence on one side has already neutralized much of this threat. Emotional stability on the other has rendered the guilt ineffective. And Truly herself is no longer the fragile child she once was. She has lived inside the contradiction. She knows the difference between genuine protection and possession disguised as concern. This is where another influence quietly reshapes the narrative. The presence of Robin cannot be ignored. For years, speculation has suggested that fear-based narratives are reinforced behind closed doors. Europe becomes dangerous. Independence becomes reckless. Distance becomes abandonment. Control is reframed as care. Restriction is sold as love. This feeds directly into a savior complex, allowing authority to masquerade as sacrifice. But Truly has lived in that environment. She recognizes the pattern. She understands that real safety does not feel suffocating. Real protection does not require obedience. Real love does not demand the shrinking of self. What is forming now is a pressure cooker. On one side stand those clinging to the illusion of authority, desperate to preserve the image of a family still orbiting around a central figure. On the other side stands a quiet coalition, not shouting, not demanding, but preparing. This is not chaos. It is methodical. The passport dispute is merely the visible layer of a much deeper conflict. Beneath it lies a battle over identity. Will truly be allowed to grow into the artist, thinker, and individual she is becoming? Or will she be forced back into a role that was designed long before she understood she had a choice? Look at the timeline. Art schools do not wait. Portfolios are built in silence. Applications move forward regardless of family tension. Every sketch completed, every plan imagined, every future envisioned pulls her further from the cul-de-sac mentality she grew up inside. And that emotional distance is something no legal document can reverse. Here is the truth that cannot be avoided. You cannot legislate love. You cannot force connection through paperwork. Refusing to sign a document may feel like power, but it is actually resignation. It is the quiet acknowledgement that control has replaced care. Inside Christine's home, the contrast is unmistakable. Encouragement replaces criticism. Stability replaces volatility. Truly is likely told to focus on her studies, to protect her peace, to plan carefully. David provides calm where chaos once ruled. And somewhere in that house, Truly sketches, not just images, but futures. Rain-soaked streets. Anonymous cafes. A life where the loudest voice she hears is her own. That contrast says everything. One side fights to dominate. The other fights to exist. As this story approaches its turning point, one truth becomes undeniable. Kody Brown is no longer the small child audiences once saw struggling to find balance on a bicycle. She is intelligent, creative, and deeply marked by her experiences. Europe symbolizes far more than education. It represents a blank canvas, a place where she can finally choose her colors without interference. Leaving home is not the tragedy here. That is life's natural progression. The tragedy is the reason behind it. 13 years offered countless opportunities for connection, presence, and protection. Those opportunities were missed. Attention was diverted. Priorities were skewed. Ego outweighed empathy. And now distance is not rebellion, it is consequence. You cannot neglect a child for years and then express shock when they seek distance measured in thousands of miles. Seeds of indifference were planted, and estrangement is the harvest. If Truly boards that plane, it will not be betrayal. It will be punctuation, the final mark on the collapse of a family structure that failed to nurture its most vulnerable member.